from what we can gather from what the Commons speakers had to say, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, and in terms of Oliver Letwin, not Oliver Letwin, my brain's gone. Oliver Dowden of the going back in time, aren't I? Showing my age. Oliver Dowden, the Tory Party chairman. What we need is more MPs like you in the House of Commons. We need more women, and that's the solution to all of these Westminster sleaze problems. Do you think that's true?
Certainly think it would help. First of all, happy birthday, Julia. Mentioning it. And I certainly think it would help because we do see that these problems we thought we had, if not dealt with, we had certainly started to address 5 years ago, and things were improving. And the last week has just been so depressing because obviously there are still problems that we have to address, we have to resolve. Yes, I think more women MPs would be important in changing the atmosphere. The dynamic would be much more female friendly. And remember, we live in a country where 52% of the population are female, so we should be reflecting that, like other diversities, in the House of Commons. And if we're going to have the respect of the public, if we're going to have the public is going to have confidence in Parliament, then it has to see that reflected, and it has to see behaviour from politicians that it can look up to and admire, and not what we've seen in the last couple of weeks.
I mean, is there a sleaze issue? The Common speakers urge radical reform to working practices, things like parliamentary researchers and aides being technically employed not by the MP themselves. So if they have a problem with the MP sexually harassing or bullying them, the person they complain to is the MP. But actually, having sort of an HR process, having people being employed by the parliamentary estate effectively rather than by them. I mean, there's been talk about closing the bars, and there are numerous bars and restaurants serving alcohol. Unusual for most workplaces, I think we can safely say. But is it about that? Is it about quotas for the number of women or ethnic minorities? I mean, or is it just about there are a few bad apples, and there are bad apples in most workplaces. We've all got scandals we've seen from various workplaces. I mean, for me, whether I was a waitress, whether I was doing temping work as a secretary, or whether as a journalist in newspapers and in radio, I've come across numerous outrageous acts of behaviour. But the difference is ours don't go on the front page of the newspapers. Is Westminster any worse than anywhere else?
Like you, Julia, I come from journalism. I was a journalist, and it's an industry which did have problems. But I think when you're talking about, certainly it has improved, but when you're talking about Parliament, the public is looking to Parliament, as I say, for a standard of behaviour. They expect a certain level of trust, to be able to put that trust in the politicians. And when they see behaviour which undermines that trust, then it undermines all of us, it undermines democracy. And I don't think it's sufficient to say, well, there's just a few bad apples. We have to address the issue. We have to be taking it seriously. And we should be looking at working practices and reviewing them, I believe, all the time. It's not good enough to say, well, it's worked for X number of years, 200 years. You need to be looking at how you can improve it. If we didn't do that, we would still be in, the old employment days before the Employment Act and equal opportunities. So we need to be looking forward all the time and addressing the issue.
A lot of this is less about, it being sleazy there, and about working hours. I mean, I looked at going into politics and then thought, I don't want to be working a 7-day, but I've got a lot of respect for MPs because I know the hours you guys work and the days you work. And, when you're an MP, you don't really have days off if you want to be a good MP in the same way the rest of us do. But, working hours, being at votes, even if it's only occasionally till 1 a.m, having to be away from your family. I mean, most women my age, you've got kids. I'm sorry, we don't want to be away from our kids. I don't want to be doing that. I want to be at home having dinner with the family. There are lots of more practical things that have got nothing to do with sleaze.
I think that is an issue that we have to address as well. Westminster is incredibly unfriendly towards families, and it does discourage women with young children. And women, say, living in Cornwall or Scotland or parts of Wales with young children, with children of any age, it's difficult to think about being away from them for long periods of time. And yes, you say it's 4 or 5 days every week where you have to be in London. But that's, we have to address these things as well. We have to encourage more women. We have to find a way of making it possible. Being an MP is an incredible privilege. And so, yes, there are drawbacks. Yes, it's a lot of work, but it's an incredible privilege to represent your community and to try to do things to improve the lot of the next generation, to try and make life better for those people who at the moment are struggling. And we shouldn't overlook that.
No, indeed. Can I ask you, though, after Neil Parish, Tory MP, he did resign after he was named as the MP who'd been looking at pornography, again, not just in his office, but in the actual chamber of the House of Commons on 2 occasions. He says that the first time he was actually searching for tractors. He is was the chair of the Environment Select Committee, and then he stumbled upon a pornography site. And the second time, though, he looked for it again, and actually was looking for the pornography site. Have you ever accidentally Googled the wrong thing?
No. I mean, have I Googled the wrong thing? Yes, but not pornography, as far as I'm aware. I think it's quite difficult to accidentally Google pornography, but I might be wrong. I don't know. It's never happened to me, but that doesn't
apparently,
mean that
according to a couple of the front pages, he was looking up the word dominator, which apparently is a kind of combine harvester. I'd like to point out to aficionados, therefore not a tractor, a different thing. But he was looking for a dominator, and that was when the website came up.
Well, I don't know. I haven't looked for a tractor online, I don't think, ever, or possibly since I left the northeast of Scotland, where I spent a good deal of my life, and it was a rural community. But I don't know. I've never been looking for.
Okay, I thought I should ask. Can I ask you also about the Angela Rayner story? So you're a Liberal Democrat, she's Labour. There's been big battles about Tory sleaze this in the last week, but all these claims about the Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail. And this sort of horrible sleazy article about a Tory MP being quoted saying that Angela Rayner uses Sharon Stone-style basic instinct tactics, crossing and uncrossing her legs to distract the Prime Minister. It has now emerged, without a shadow of a doubt, that Angela Rayner actually said this herself. The Tory MP quoted in the Mail was quoting Angela Rayner, who was joking about it in a drunken, perfectly acceptable, no problem, having a good bit of bantery conversation on the House of Commons terrace. She was actually quoting it. She'd actually used it in a podcast some time ago as well. And actually, it had been an article in the Mail written by a columnist, Amanda Patel, and she had mentioned it, but she hadn't complained about it, no issue with it. Suddenly, when it's in this paper, it's a quote from a Tory MP just before local elections, she turns it into a big outrage. Do you think she's as bad as everyone else on this front?
I think the problem is that the story was in the paper, and part of the problem is the way it was handled. And I don't think there's any excuse really nowadays for that sort of discussion, that sort of attitude.
But she's done it herself. She jokes about it herself to MPs.
Whoever started it, Julia, it opened up a conversation which I found distasteful. I don't know how you found it as a woman, but I found it distasteful. And
I think women are allowed to joke about themselves as much as they want. What they're not allowed to do is then complain when someone passes on that joke.
And what we shouldn't always do, and I think there's an element of this has emerged, is that we always look to blame the woman in whatever circumstances.
She's the one who told the joke.
It shouldn't, I don't think, have been something, whoever said it, which was in the papers and was used against a politician.
It wasn't used against her. She told the joke about herself.
Well, I think we did get to the stage where it was being used against it, and then it was being used. And I think what it highlighted more than anything else is that we still have problems in this country with our attitude to women, and we have to get around that. And that takes us back to the very first point you made about having more women in Parliament.
Well, again, more women making jokes about their own body parts, as far as we could tell. We also talk about Westminster sleaze this weekend, but there's also a lot of talk about Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of your party. She was at this Durham curry and beer night during lockdown rules in May 2021. First of all, the Labour Party, having denied that she was there, but also this Sharon Stone basic instinct claim. All of this outrage from Angela Rayner. I mean, I was with her as well on this. Absolutely outrageous. The Mail on Sunday, not the Mail on Sunday reported it, but the Tory MP should claim that Angela Rayner is using her feminine wiles, doing an impression of Sharon Stone in basic instinct, crossing and uncrossing her legs to try and distract the Prime Minister during PMQs. Absolutely outrageous that women should be talked about in that way. Turns out the person who talked about women in that way herself was actually Angela Rayner. And actually, this was a story she has told herself on a podcast, and a story that she has told to MPs, and that she was being quoted by the MP when that was quoted in the Mail on Sunday. She should apologise, shouldn't she?
Well,
I don't understand that this story has come from her. That is absolutely disputed.
No, it's
never
not.
Wanted this story to come out to be splashed in the headlines in this way, that you're kind of like, Boris Johnson's so easily distracted that if she uncrosses her legs, it's going to throw him off entirely. I mean, that whole story of blaming her, instead of talking about the serious things she talks about at the dispatch box, the serious things we're all facing across the country.
Well, yes, there's lots, and there's lots.
That's what we should be talking about.
There's lots of stuff we should be talking about. But nevertheless, she could have said when that story came out, look, I'm not bothered by this. Let's talk about important things. No, she wrote a massive long thread on Twitter, made statements, did interviews on ITV about how outraged and how terrible it was that people were talking about her in this way. She told the story herself in a podcast and to MPs. The MP that outrageously said that she was doing this was quoting a story she told herself.
But I don't think the story came from her, and I don't think the way it's been covered is correct. Well, I don't know that. And also you talk about the beer and curry night, knowing full well it was not a beer and curry night that Angela talked about.
There was beer and there was curry.
You're trying to make it out to be the same kind of parties that the people actually on the doorstep that I'm talking about. No one, you may say this because I'm a Labour MP, but literally no one has talked about this on the doorstep. And what they are talking about is what Boris Johnson did with all his parties, 16 parties, crates of beer coming in, the amount of PCN and the police investigation that's been letting down the country. And what the link is there with these PPE decisions is about decision making in government. Who do we have? Can we trust our leaders? That's why it's important to be talking about in this week of the election.
I am absolutely outraged by the Partygate accusations, and I have called for the Prime Minister to go on that basis. But I'm sorry, I know not my listeners hate me for that, but I'm outraged by that behaviour. If you bring in laws, you don't obey them yourself, you should go. Simple as that. However, Labour Party voted for these rules. The rules were very clear about party campaigning, and I think the rules were stupid, but you and your fellow MPs voted for stupid rules. You backed all of the stupid rules that said you were not allowed to socialise at work, during work, at any time after work. You were not allowed to have a beer and a curry with people indoors at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday night in April 2021. That's a simple matter of fact. After Neil Parish, the Tory MP, has resigned over the weekend after it was found that he was the MP who had been watching porn in the Commons chamber, it has emerged that he would be Googling, he claims, tractors, and then had somehow come across a dodgy porn site. And the second time, though, when he watched it, it was a deliberate choice. Front page of various of the papers, including The Sun, pointing out that he wanted a dominator. Apparently, this is a kind of combine harvester. Of course, you already knew that, didn't you? As we all did. I had asked you a little bit earlier, what have you Googled by accident? Can't read a single one of those out on air, so we've given up on that for understandable reasons. But talking about Westminster Sleaze and talking about all the other stories around, are we actually focusing on the stuff that people care about? Beergate, Partygate, Angela Rayner's, Ginger, whatever, sleazy MPs. Do we care? I want to know, as MPs focus on Westminster Sleaze, with local elections just this Thursday, I want to know, what should they be talking about to get your vote? Tell me, what should they be talking about to get your vote? Do tweet at talkTV, or you can text the word talk and then your message to 87222. Put that question to Conservative commentator Benedict Spence, who joins me right now. What should MPs be talking about, Benedict?
I think the important thing, first of all, is to remember that these are local elections, and that actually if local councillors are offering simple things like actually collecting your bins or getting rid of the foxes that drag those bin bags into your garden, maybe you should be voting for them along those lines. But when it comes to MPs, I think actually, as much as Partygate is very important, and it is, things like long-term energy strategy and house building are the things that certainly would interest me. And I don't think we have very much sense being spoken about either of those
Well,
things.
we'll put some of those questions to Universities Minister Michelle Donnellan, who joins us in the next 10 minutes or so. First up, let's talk to Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat. Good morning to you, Tom.
Morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on this bank holiday. What do you think MP should be talking about? Because so much of the focus in the last week or two has been about Partygate, with Boris Johnson and his various staff, Beergate, Angela Rayner and Ginger Bits and goodness knows what words we can't say on air. And then we've got an MP watching porn, Googling tractors. I mean, do MPs ever actually talk about the stuff that affects ordinary people? I mean, whether or not we can actually afford our energy bills, whether or not we can afford to go to the supermarket anymore?
Julia, other than talking to you about it, I'm afraid I spend most of my time talking about things like Ukraine, obviously as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, or indeed the threat of the way China is changing the world order and things like that. I talk about the problems that all of this is causing to British homes in terms of energy price rises and food price rises. But I think I spend most of my time talking, because, this is what matters to people in the community that I live in, about bus routes that are being cut or not being supported enough, or about bins. And I have to say, Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council, Sevenoaks District Council, those are the two in my patch.
Can we listen? Can I just say, we don't want to get into any specific local elections simply because we then get into a whole lot of common territory.
Have local elections.
Oh, thank God, because it's just it creates an absolute nightmare when it comes to
no. Neither of them are up for a vote. But that's basically what they do. They
can I just say,
quite rightly.
I would do 3.5 hours every single day on my show about weekly bin collections if it was up to me.
Do you know, it's one of the things that really matters. I mean, and in a community like mine, if you don't get it right, you end up with the foxes getting into the bins. I'm sure this is true in other places too. And you end up with a complete mess. And
the whole of the country is currently nodding, saying, yes, this is what we care about. Of course, this of course, is with your food waste, because you have to have food to waste, which a lot of people don't because of the cost of living crisis. When MPs are talking about, we need to get more women in Parliament. We've had Oliver Dowden, your party chairman, talking about this over the weekend. And when we're talking about, Labour be going on about Partygate, Tories have been going on about Beergate, every other party getting their tuppence put in about sleazy government, sleazy MPs watching pornography, etc., etc. Do you think any of that even registers with people? Does any of it matter? And would it all change if suddenly we had 50-50 men and women in Parliament, which seems to be the solution to everybody?
Well, look, I think it matters in the sense that people do quite rightly ask for integrity in public office. And the reason they ask for it, and the reason we should expect it as a country, as citizens, is for the very simple reason that the rule of law and fairness are absolutely fundamental to us all having opportunity in the future and having, the ability to innovate and all the rest of it. If you want to see the difference, look at the comparison between Zelensky and Putin. One of them has got integrity and can unite a country. The other one is a thieving. I'll stop there because I was going to say some rather rude things. And what one of them is doing is defending his country, and the other one is throwing his young people into a meat grinder of death. Now, the reality is that's a very extreme example, but, integrity in office does matter. People do expect to have leaders who can set out an agenda and can try and deliver on it, not people who try to do the reversal.
Oh, we've got a few problems with your line. I think we've just got you back there, thankfully.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologise.
So it's bank holiday wireless. What can we do? If you say integrity does matter, what could we do to make things improve on that front? Would it be closing some of those Westminster bars? Would it be quotas for women MPs? Would it be some other sort of thing? Some other sort of test for people to become MPs?
So my view is that the best judge of this is the people who vote for us. The appeal court, as it were, for me, is the electors of Tunbridge and Morling. If I get things right, they should return me, and if I get things wrong, they should fire me. I mean, that's how democracy works. My problem with having sort of more and more civil servants judging me is who's in charge of our democracy? Is it civil servants and the government, or is it the electors? And I'm in favour of being the electors because that's how democracy works best.
On that subject, I must ask you: have you ever Googled tractors?
That was one of the questions I was asking myself over the weekend. What on earth was he Googling? Because I couldn't see the link in any way.
Between tractors and a pornography site. It turns out, according to the Front of the Sun, a dominator. A dominator is a kind. To be fair, Neil Parish, the Tory MP who has resigned, is a farmer by trade originally, and he was chair of the Environmental Committee. And apparently, a dominator is a kind of combine harvester, which is news to a lot of us.
You learn something new every day, Julia.
Never Googled one.
No, I haven't.
Just clarify. Let's talk about sleaze, Westminster sleaze, whether it was Partygate, whether it's Beergate, Angela Rayner and her various ginger bits, whether it's a Tory MP watching pornography, having Googled for tractors. Does Westminster have a sleaze problem, or is it just some bad apples?
So I personally, as a female MP, having worked in Parliament for over 7 years now, have not experienced any of these incidences. It is not the majority. The problem here is a minority of misogynistic dinosaurs who need to be called out, and there is no place for it in Parliament, but it isn't the majority. There is no cultural problem, I believe.
Well, this is it. I worked in Westminster, quite some years ago on a regular basis. I didn't think that it was a particularly misogynistic, sexist place. Now we're told it is. Is the solution more women MPs?
Well, no, I think that misses the point, really. Is that therefore saying that you get more women because all men are bad. I mean, it's illogical. What we need to do is really engage with the independent commission that we now have, where people can come forward and make their claims. We need to encourage people to do so. We need to make sure that everybody knows if they act in this way, they will be found out, and very publicly. Because there is no place in Parliament for this kind of behaviour. But it is the minority, it is not the majority.
Can I ask you finally about Angela Rayner and all these allegations allegations, she basically was the person who told the story to MPs that was quoted in the Mail on Sunday about acting in a Basic Instinct Sharon Stone-style tactic way to distract the Prime Minister. She was clearly joking, having a casual drink on the Commons terrace with Tory MPs. She expressed outrage when this story was then told in the paper, and yet she was the one who had told the story originally. What do you make of that?
Well, look, the Mail themselves know who their source was. They've been very open and upfront about this. And I think no matter who said it at the end of the day, the comments were misogynistic. They don't paint our politics.
But they were made by Angela Rayner.
Yeah, but they didn't help our agenda in terms of democracy.
So Angela Rayner is misogynistic.
I think the comments themselves were misogynistic. They didn't do female politicians any favours. Whether she said it or not is a matter for the Mail and herself. I wasn't involved in those conversations.
Okay. In answer to my question of the day, as MPs focus on Westminster's sleaze with local elections on Thursday, what should they be talking about to get your vote? We'll get to some more of those over the next hour. Before, of course, Mike Graham's here to tell us what's happening on Mike Graham's Independent Republic from 10 o'clock. We did attempt at 6:30 this morning. I know you were probably asleep then, but at 6:30 this morning we did attempt another question of the day after these extraordinary stories about Neil Parish, the Tory MP as was. He resigned on Saturday after he was named and shamed for being the MP who had been looking at pornography, sitting in the Commons chamber, not even in an office on his own, in the Commons chamber on 2 separate occasions. He insists there that he'd actually been, as a farmer and as the chair of the Environmental Select Committee, actually Googling tractors, and a strange website came up. Yes, really. I was asking if you'd ever made any mistakes Googling, but we couldn't read any of them out on air, as you could imagine. I don't know what we were thinking. But let's talk about all these sleaze allegations that are swirling around Westminster right now with Jo Tanner. She's a political strategist and former advisor to Boris Johnson when he was London Mayor. Good morning to you, Jo.
Morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Look, there's an awful lot of these sleaze allegations around. Those of us who were old enough, at 54 today, I certainly am old enough to remember all of these, the back to basics John Major period, where you constantly just had sleaze story after sleaze story. We've got all this stuff, whether it's about Partygate and breaking lockdown rules, Beergate with Keir Starmer. We've got Angela Rayner and her ginger whatnot, can't say that on air, and Sharon Stone Basic Instinct tactics that PMQs. We've got an MP watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber after apparently Googling, we think, the word dominator, which it turns out is a kind of, if you read the front page of the Sun today, is a kind of combine harvester. You learn something new every day. Do we have a problem with sleaze at Westminster? You've been around it for years and years and years. Is there a problem? Is it worse than it ever was? Is it better than it ever was? Does it not exist at all?
I think it's probably always existed. And I'm sure if you went and stood on a bridge in London, particularly in the city, and spoke to workers going in tomorrow to banks and goodness knows where, they would probably tell you of sexism in their industry. They would probably tell you of moments that have happened to them. I think it's not uncommon in various workplaces. I think Westminster is unusual. Let's face it, you worked there for many years, Julie, you know how it was. There is a very strange lack of HR. You have essentially 650 something small businesses which are run by people who have often very large egos. Every bit of work that the staff do affects their individual standing, their individual popularity. It's all about them. Now, fundamentally, that doesn't make for great bosses. That doesn't make for great staff welfare at times. There are brilliant people that work in Westminster. I'm not suggesting that all MPs are a problem, but there is fundamentally a lack of balance and a lack of check and in some respects safeguarding for staff in particular.
And this is where Sir Lindsay Hoyle, common speaker, has suggested radical reform, where again we have this thing about people should be sacked. Well, we can't sack an MP if they don't resign, other than the recall to Parliament, which is only a recent innovation. Someone can lose the whip. Well, we've got a Labour MP, well, no longer a Labour MP, independent, sitting on the benches, who's been convicted of threatened to throw acid over a woman because she didn't like relationship with her boyfriend, for goodness sake, and she's still sitting in Parliament. We've had a lot of other sleazy things, and people still able to stay. You've got these MPs; they're elected effectively, elected by the people and employed by the people. The people they employ, if they've got a problem with how they're treated, the person they could complain to would be the person who they're complaining about. So, do we need to have, say, this sort of HR system? And is that really the solution to the problem, or is the problem, as some have suggested, Oliver Dowd and the Tory party chair, that we don't have enough women in Parliament? If there were more women in Parliament, would that make a difference?
I think ultimately having more women around will, I'm sure, help in terms of it. It's got to do something in terms of tempering bad behaviour. But I also don't think that this is necessarily a men on women issue. There are also gay men that have complained about problems in Westminster. And I think
there was one female, wasn't it? No, male reporter or advisor who said that there's a male MP who, when he's drunk in the parliamentary bars, goes around licking their faces.
Yeah, I mean, that is.
Ew.
I mean, but this is what I mean about, is this necessarily a sex thing or a sleaze thing, or is this actually just about some very strange people in a place where there aren't decent checks and balances and there isn't a proper process for reporting? I think there is one of the comments that was made over the weekend in the Times was that this is actually about power. And there is a problem in that, as you rightly point out, and Speaker Lindsay Hoyle is looking at, there is a challenge as to how do you get rid of people, and when is it appropriate to get rid of MPs, for example, because there can be fundamental disagreements over policy, which should not mean that then somebody loses their job. There's a very big difference between that and when actually somebody is behaving inappropriately. Now, I've seen over 20 years, but I also have seen some amazing people. And the thing I'm saddest about is that this is going to put people off engaging in politics, and in particular it's going to put people off standing. And that's what we really need, is if you're at home, you're listening to this, or you're driving somewhere and you're thinking this is awful, don't let it put you off, because it's those very people that need to be in Parliament.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at, say, what's happening in Ukraine, President Zelensky, he was an actor and a comedian, and I'm sure he's not perfect, everybody. I know people aren't perfect in politics, but he decided he wanted to change things. I mean, and thank goodness, I think under a different leader, they'd have been on the first private jet out of there, and Kyiv would be currently under Russian control. And so, people can make a difference. We've seen this again and again, haven't we? I mean, in Italy, again, a similar situation where, someone who was supposed to be a joke candidate almost got elected. Do we get to a certain extent the politicians we deserve, though?
Well, I think that's a tough question. I think fundamentally, if you look at the many great people that are in Westminster, then I think we do get great politicians that we deserve. But at the same time, I think there are people that are perhaps maybe they went into it for the right reasons, but they've become jaded. Maybe they did have an obsession with tractors with strange names. Who knows? There are some funny people around. I think it's an odd one. I think not understanding that there's a time and a place for certain things you might want to see in private.
Googling tractors, for instance, it turns out. Yes.
I'm sure they're selling a lot at the moment with the publicity that particular brand getting.
Wait, hold on a minute. Do you think, given if we were told that Neil Parish must have been Googling Dominator, meaning a combine harvester, not the same as a tractor, farmers listening, but do you think there are people going, I wasn't going to buy a combine harvester, but now I am?
Well, certainly whoever's in charge of their website will be chuffed for the ratings.
An impulse purchase
through the roof. Yeah. Are you not getting one for your birthday, Julie? I'm not sure. You're going to get home and you're going to see one.
Frankly, my husband needs to up his game when it comes to the gifts, doesn't he? He really does. I mean, we're laughing about this and everything, but I have to say, I do think sometimes we get a little bit too obsessed with this stuff, and I wonder whether we should be focusing on. And we're asking people on Twitter this morning, about what do you want politicians to be talking about? So much of the time when there's problems, it is MPs talking about problems they themselves have to. I'm not saying just because you're highly paid you have to put up with sexism or someone watching porn next to you or anything, but I do find it extraordinary how much time especially a lot of women MPs, spend talking about themselves and how awful their lives are, and whether it's someone complaining about, I didn't have a babysitter who had a late vote, and these Labour MPs who are like Stella Creasy, constantly complaining about how bad their lot is, when they are incredibly privileged and highly paid people who frankly do have the power. Because if you see someone, say, watching porn or someone pinches your bottom, you can name and shame them in the papers and you can have them out. So those are the women who have the most power of any women in this country.
But I think fundamentally, how are we any different to a country that doesn't, for example, let women participate fully in democracy and things, if actually we have a system that puts people off?
Joe, I'm not having that nonsense.
I don't mean it as in it's as bad, but it does have degrees of. We should never, ever be in a situation where people are not.
Maybe women are too sensible. One of the reasons lots of other countries actually do have a higher number of women is because they have a list system where actually the MPs, men or women, aren't that accountable to their local electorate. Maybe women are too sensible. You and I are involved.
We get the right politicians that way. That's also a challenge.
Yeah, you and I are both involved in politics, but we didn't stand for election for a reason.
But I think fundamentally we have to have systems where people are engaged and feel they can make a difference. That is so important. Okay. So calling it out is absolutely right. And you are right. We do need women that speak up and then will say things have happened. At the same time, one of the big stories this morning about cancer and cancer rates, for example, which is on the front page of the Times. I was at the weekend with a bunch of politicians and riders from my football team, which I set up, a parliamentary women's football team. We cycled through the night with a bunch of people, thousands of people who've experienced cancer, lost family members. Our captain, Tracy Crouch, an MP who spoke publicly about her own fight with cancer.
On the show last week,
They speak, these women have got experiences that matter as well about lots of other things.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about cancer care up next. Just want to talk to you. We talk about some high-profile women. Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. We've had Partygate, we've had Beergate, we've talked ad nauseum about all of them. Still a lot of front pages about Beergate. And Angela Rayner was at this curry and beer night. We had a shadow minister saying, no, it wasn't a curry and beer night. There was curry, there was beer. That's the reality on this night in April 2021 when the local election campaigning was on the case. Seems to me everyone was breaking the law. But when people bring in laws or vote to support laws, as Keir Starmer and Labour MPs do, they should be beholden to obey those laws. Angela Rayner's got in a lot of hot water over the Sharon Stone Basic Instinct row. Basically, Mail on Sunday story reporting an MP on the Tory MP saying that she was using Basic Instinct Sharon-style tactics, crossing her legs to distract the Prime Minister. It then emerged that was something that had been written about quite a long time beforehand. Angela Rayner had jokingly and very amusingly quoted it in a podcast. She then, it turns out, was the source of the MP's quote because she herself had told that story to MPs. A number of MPs were witness to that on the Commons Terrace on a bit of a boozy night drinking. She claims to have been outraged by these comments. They were comments she herself made about herself. Should she apologise?
I don't know if it's an apology matter. If anything, Julia, I'm just kind of fed up with it. I'm fed up with this kind of suggestion that women have to use sex or that, because she's a woman, it's all about that and not actually about
she made the suggestion.
And that's the thing. I don't know the source. I've heard what's been said about this story and how it came about. I think it's sad that there weren't more important things to be writing about than that. I just think really we've wasted a lot of time. Go back to that front page of the Times, people are dying. People did not go to doctors and talk about the fact that they had a lump they were worried about. That's the stuff that really matters, surely.
All right. Joe Tanner, political strategist, former advisor to Boris Johnson. I think that's what a lot of politicians want us to be talking about as well. Although, do they? Because then we actually focus on the policy decisions they have made that have got us into this position.